Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone. Welcome to session number 274 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. Today we are in the Manual for Teachers and we are focusing on question number 25. Are psychic powers desirable? Okay. Let us begin. Paragraph 1. The answer to this question is much like the preceding one when we were talking about reincarnation. Is reincarnation so? And the conclusion was, if it's helpful for you, go with it. You'll find out the truth, the ultimate truth, sooner or later. All right? But if it's helpful, do it. Go with it. All right? The answer to this question, so are psychic powers desirable? The answer to this question is much like the preceding one. There are, of course, no unnatural powers, and it is obviously merely an appeal to magic to make up a power that does not exist. It is equally obvious, however, that each individual has many abilities of which he is unaware. As his awareness increases, he may well develop abilities that seem quite startling to him. Yet nothing he can do can compare even the slightest with the glorious surprise of remembering who he is. Let all his learning and all his efforts be directed toward this one great final surprise. And he will not be content to be delayed by the little ones that come to him on the way. Okay. He says there are, of course, no unnatural powers, right? Because there's only one mind, and there's only the oneness. Right? Everything else is illusory. Right? So, and it is obviously merely an appeal to magic to make up a power that does not exist. All right? And that, once again, that appeal to magic is to see the problem as being outside the mind, in the world, and then making up a power to deal with it. All right? I think we've all run into, many people have run into people that, have made up certain powers about themselves that will help you deal with whatever problem you think you have in the world. Whatever. Doesn't make you bad. It just delays your progress. That belief in the magic. All right? All right? It is equally obvious, however, that each individual has many abilities of which he is unaware. All right? And as his awareness increases, he may well develop abilities that seem quite startling to him. And Dr. Wapner gives the example of Helen Schuckman, the scribe of the Course. When she agreed to join with Bill Thetford to find a better way, all right, to communicate, she began to experience all kinds of psychic things, psychic dreams, and her ability to channel was a quote-unquote psychic ability, all right? Psychic power. All right? So, and she was surprised, but she never used it for the idea of separation. In other words, I'm better than you, I got a different ability, I can do this and you can't. It's not like that. That's putting it in the ego's use, to see yourself as, a step above or something, all right, or being blessed with an ability, where other people are just not, all right. This is, and there are people who are naturally more psychic than others, all right. I grew up in a family with women who were, quite psychic. I had stories of my grandmother, who was born in Ireland, on the west of Ireland, as the priest once told my niece, where the witches come from. She had certain abilities, and I always knew it's like, how did my mother know that? How did she know where I was, what I was doing? And my sisters, right? I have especially one sister who's very, very psychic, all right? And her daughter also, but she kind of denies it. She's afraid of it. So, it's always been around, right? And it all depends on, like he says, on what's the purpose. What are you using it for? Are you using it for in reinforcing the idea of oneness and innocence, or are you using it to separate, using it in the service of the ego? So as your awareness increases, you may develop abilities that seem quite startling. Yet nothing he can do can compare, even in the slightest, with the glorious surprise of remembering who he is. So he's saying, so what? You have some kind of ability to communicate with someone who's not even in your presence, or like a friend of mine, she's been doing psychic readings with tarot cards and playing cards, actually, for 50 years, right? And on her path with this ability, she became more and more interested in helping people realize that they're okay, all right? That they're innocent, all right? And so she uses her ability with gentleness, although, she'll tell you the truth if you want to hear it, all right? But her abilities came early in life, and, as she grew, in spiritual maturity, that ability was used differently, in different ways. All right. So, there are people who channel, right? You could be sitting next to someone anywhere, railroad station, waiting at an office somewhere, and you just feel what they're going through. It's like, all right? That's the way it is. So don't be surprised. And it's nothing to strive for. If it happens, it happens. It says if it happens to you, use it, it's in the service of the Holy Spirit. All right? That's all. So, it says, because it doesn't compare to the glorious surprise of remembering who you are. It's only an experience along the way, perhaps. All right. So let all learning and all his efforts be directed toward this one great final surprise. And he will not be content to be delayed by the little ones that may come to him along the way. Right? You might develop certain abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, medically intuitive, all these things, channeling. Right? He says, don't be delayed by these things. Right? The main goal is remembering who you are. All right? Okay. Paragraph 2. Certainly there are many psychic powers that are clearly in line with this course. Communication is not limited to the small range of channels the world recognizes. If it were, there would be little point in trying to teach salvation. It would be impossible to do so. The limits the world places on communication are the chief barriers to direct experience of the Holy Spirit, whose presence is always there and whose voice is always available, but for the hearing. These limits are placed out of fear, for without them, the walls that surround all the separate places of the world would fall at the holy sound of his voice. Right? Who transcends these limits in any way is merely becoming more natural. He is doing nothing special, and there is no magic in his accomplishments. Okay? What's coming to mind right now is that when you connect, you go to your right mind, as we say, and you're sitting in that presence, however briefly, whatever length of time. Time is not, doesn't matter. You connect with the truth of who you are. And that actually extends to other, quote unquote, minds, other minds. But the mind being one, that realization of the love and the innocence goes out. Now that's a bit of a psychic ability, all right? And sometimes that's the best you can do. You encounter someone passes you, all right? And all of a sudden it's as if you experience exactly what that person is going through, all right? And you're not going to go up and tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, look, can I give you a hand with this?" Or, especially in New York, you don't want to go invade anybody's space. But the thing is, you felt that, all right? The best you can do is go to your right mind, all right? And just ask, what does love look like in this situation? Just sit with the love and let it be passed on. All right? So he says, don't be delayed by these things. All right? He says, certainly there are many psychic powers that are clearly in line with the course. Right? That's what I mean by it. You go to your right mind and you're opening up to a lot of impulses, I would say. And communication is not limited to the small range of channels the world recognizes. All right? The world limits the channels of communication. All right? Communication is not limited to the small range of channels. If it were, there'd be little point in trying to teach salvation. All right? The idea is to open up the mind, allow it to receive the message that's already there inside you. Right? The limits the world places on communication are the chief barriers to direct experience of the Holy Spirit, whose presence is always there and whose voice is always available, but for the hearing. All right? So we put limits on ourselves. You know, like my beautiful niece, who, even as a child with her psychic abilities, she would shut it down. I'm sitting watching TV with her one time. She was maybe 8 or 9. And she walks over to the TV and shuts it off. And she's like this. And I go, what's the problem? She goes, Uncle Kevin, I hate that deja vu experience. And so that's okay. Let her, you know, on when the day she's not afraid of it, she'll recognize it. Right? As of now, which is like, you know, 20, 25 years later, you know, she makes choices and doesn't realize that it's coming from that extremely powerful, intuitive place that she has. Okay. But placing the limits is placed out of fear. Right? Because without them, it says here, the walls that surround all the separate places of the world would fall at the holy sound of his voice. Right? Like the walls of Jericho coming tumbling down, the sound of the trumpets. Right? But we are afraid of approaching the knowledge of who we really are. Right? You know, my metaphor of entering the cold water of a lake up in the mountains. You go in a little at a time, if you're like me. And that's what we do. We approach our true nature a little at a time. A little at a time. So we place limits on our abilities to communicate. All right? So these limits are placed out of fear. For without the limits, the walls that surround all separate places of the world, all ideas of separation, all those walls would come tumbling down. All right? They would fall at the holy sound of his voice. And so, paragraph 2, sentence 7, who transcends these limits in any way is merely becoming more natural. Right? So who transcends the limits of communication, you're just becoming more natural, because that natural state is the state of oneness, one mind, where you know and are known. That's all there is to it. Right? You're becoming more natural. He is doing nothing special, and there is no magic in his accomplishments. All right? So if I walk through the halls of some building and I pass a person, and all of a sudden I get this wave of fear and anxiety and vulnerability. Right? It's nothing special. It's not. It just is. It just is. But you get that. All of a sudden, you know what this person is going through. Right? And like I say, you don't have to walk up to them. It doesn't matter. You just engage with the Holy Spirit and ask, what does love look like here? That's all. So it's nothing. He does nothing special, and there's no magic in his accomplishments. Paragraph 3. The seemingly new abilities that may be gathered on the way can be very helpful. given to the Holy Spirit and used under His direction, they are valuable teaching aids. To this, the question of how they arise is irrelevant. The only important consideration is how they are used. Taking them as ends in themselves, no matter how this is done, will delay progress. Nor does their value lie in proving anything. Achievements from the past, unusual attunement with the unseen, or special favors from God. God gives no special favors, and no one has any powers that are not available to everyone. Only by tricks of magic are special powers demonstrated. All right? So this is not, some carnival act, which is only for your own aggrandizement, right? The only important consideration is how they are used. So if you happen to develop some kind of ability, right, or it just comes because you're becoming more natural, you're getting closer to the oneness of the mind. This is then, remember, it's all about how it's used. Do I use it for the good of mankind, so to speak, which is seeing the innocence, helping people realize they're not separated. And we don't have to necessarily say anything or do anything to help, right? Because the minds are joined. But you may be directed to say or do something. It doesn't matter. And he says, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. Okay. To this, the question of how they arise is irrelevant. All right? So don't worry about it. How does this happen? How do we get this? That's irrelevant. All right? The only important consideration is how they are used. Like I say, even my friend who's the card reader, and very psychic, let me tell you. All right? And as I say, as she has matured, so to speak, spiritually, she becomes more compassionate. And her ability it helps people to see that, first of all, they're not alone in this hellscape, right? That that love does surround them, they're worthy of it, okay? And whatever other message they need to reassure them they're not guilty and they're not alone, right? They're not being punished for anything, okay? And so her ability is used for that. Others, and I was thinking about it this morning, like in your professions, whatever your profession is, all of a sudden there's a certain knowing, right? You know, or you get a feeling, oh, you know what's about to happen. You can all of a sudden, like I say, you have a feeling, you know what's going to happen, and you prevent it, or you're there to immediately address it, right? You can take care of those needs, right? Because you have this knowing of your environment, and this is your chosen field, and people are lucky to be under your care. Because along with your let's call it intuition, all right, or psychic power, All right. Somebody once told me intuition is the ability to add up 2 and 2 and get 4 very quickly. All right. But that's part of it. All right. And you can use that ability to become compassionate. Right. No matter who's presenting in front of you. Right. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's a nurse. Right. And she has many instances when the people who are presenting themselves in front of her for to be taken care of, they're let's put it they're cantankerous, let's put it this way. All right, or they're bellicose. All right, but she has that ability to choose, and more often than not, she chooses compassion. In other words, she looks past their sidewalk act, so to speak. She looks past their costume and gets to the healing. Right. Okay. So it doesn't matter where the ability comes from. Right. Just imagine, the only thing that matters is what is it for? How are they used? Right? Taking them as ends in themselves, no matter how this is done, will delay progress. So if I'm just looking to become psychic, wow, that delays your progress. Right? That's not what it's all about. And their value doesn't lie in improving anything. God doesn't give special favors. You haven't been, picked out by God for this special gift. He says God doesn't give special gifts. Right? As Dr. Wapnick says, this is why we became angry at him in the first place. He wouldn't notice our specialness, our individuality. All right? There are no special gifts. All right? God gives no special favors. And no one has any powers that are not available to everyone. Only by tricks of magic are special powers demonstrated. Right? That just reminds me of my family. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and my mother and father made sure everybody gets it. If one person gets it, everybody gets it. That's the way it was. Right? So, paragraph 4. Nothing that is genuine is used to deceive. Right? The Holy Spirit is incapable of deception. He can use only genuine abilities. What is used for magic is useless to him. What he sees, what he uses, cannot be used for magic. There is, however, a particular appeal in unusual abilities that can be curiously tempting. Here are strengths which the Holy Spirit wants and needs. Yet the ego sees in these same strengths an opportunity to glorify itself. Strengths turn to weakness or tragedy indeed. Yet what is not given to the Holy Spirit must be given to weakness. For what is withheld from love is given to fear, and will be fearful in consequence. All right. Nothing that is genuine, paragraph 4, is used to deceive. He says, but it's tempting, these abilities, suppose, you're psychic. I just remembered a perfect example. I worked in a restaurant 30 years ago, right? and the restaurant was sponsoring. Well, just to drum up patronage, we had a psychic. Right, a psychic came in on Wednesday nights. Okay, and he was there, and so all of a sudden, the staff gets friendly with the guy, and all of a sudden he was using his ability to manipulate one of the waitresses. I was appalled. I couldn't believe that this guy had like no moral compass, right? But he came under the influence of a couple of high rollers, and there he was manipulating this young girl. And, the rest of the staff got together and nipped it in the bud, believe me. But that's an example of putting it in the ego's use, Yeah. I just remembered that guy. But you take a person like the Long Island psychic, the Long Island, I forget what they call it, but it's that lady that lives in Long Island, and all of a sudden she'll tell you, she communicates with your loved ones who have passed on, all right? And it's quite amazing, and but you could see, I mean, she has a show and all that, and I don't know if it's still on TV, but when I would watch these episodes, it was always for a good outcome, always for good, always. And, to me, that's putting it that's putting it for use with the Holy Spirit. Even though she didn't think that way, that's not her path, but that was her natural inclination, was to show compassion and kindness and innocence. Right? So you can use it either way. You can do whatever you want, As that Bob Dylan says, do what you want, but next time you see me coming, you better run. All right. And that's what he means, like this guy that was manipulating that waitress. Said, strengths turn to weakness or tragedy indeed. So putting it in the ego's use, that's a tragedy. You're wasting that gift, so to speak, that talent, right? Using it for despicable purposes, really. That's a tragedy. Yet what is not given to the Holy Spirit must be given to weakness. All right? So it was given over to the weaknesses. For what is withheld from love is given to fear, and will be fearful in consequence. So he gave his powers over to fear. He withheld it from love. All right? And thus he lived a fearful life, no matter what kind of ability he had. He had a fearful life because he was using it in the service of the ego, which means you're separate. And you have to go get what you need. That's a fearful existence, because deep down inside you believe in punishment, guilt, right? But that's something to think about. For what is withheld from love is given to fear, right? If we're not thinking with the right mind, we're thinking with the ego mind, right? Which is a fearful place to be. Paragraph 5. Even those who no longer value the material things of the world may still be deceived by psychic powers. An investment has been withdrawn from the world's material gifts. The ego has been seriously threatened. It may still be strong enough to rally under this new temptation to win back strength by guile. Many have not seen through the ego's defenses here, although they are not particularly subtle. Yet, given a remaining wish to be deceived, deception is made easy. Now the power is no longer a genuine ability and cannot be used dependably. It is almost inevitable that, unless the individual changes his mind about his purpose, he will bolster his power's uncertainties with increasing deception. I think we can refer to that man who was reading in a restaurant. Right? He had the abilities. Right? He had the ability. Right? He wouldn't give me a reading. He avoided me. But I think I know why. Not because there's anything special about me. It's because one of my brothers was about to pass away. I think he got spooked by it. He might have seen that and didn't want to tell me. That's what I think anyway. But anyway, he was using these powers of, he was tempted by the ego. Right? Because the ego is threatened once you're becoming more natural. Once you're getting closer to who you really are, the ego is threatened. Because the individuality, the personality, the body will disappear. Right? It will be seen as meaningless. And the ego doesn't want to be seen as meaningless. The ego wants that individuality to exist. Right? So it fights back. And he says, and its methods are not that subtle because it's desperate. And so this man is tempted with all kinds of things. As they say, the world, the flesh, and the devil. All right. I'm sure the people who were asking him to do this despicable thing were paying him highly because they could. I knew who they were. They could. Or else they would threaten him physically. They could do that too. But the ego has been seriously threatened. All right? When your mind is dropping the defenses of the world. All right? Like he says, for those who no longer value material things, the world may still be deceived by psychic powers. All right? So you're on your way, right? Living this rather stoic life, right? But you get deceived by the psychic powers. And since the ego has been threatened, right, it may rally under this new temptation to win back strength by guile. Right? Many have not seen through the ego's defenses here, although they are not particularly subtle. So all of a sudden you get this, oh yeah, I could do this, I could do that, right? I can get this, I can have that, right? And all of a sudden the ego is getting stronger where you were relinquishing it. Now all of a sudden it fights back, right? Because you have this power, right? All right. Yet, given a remaining wish to be deceived, deception is made easy. All right. And what he means by that is you still have that wish to see yourself as separate. Right? There's still a little bit of that wish is left, and it only takes that little bit. That's that wish to be deceived, the wish to believe that you're separated. He says when that kicks in, deception is easy. Right? Now the power, so to speak, is no longer a genuine ability, and it cannot be used dependably. Right? It is almost inevitable that unless the individual changes his mind about the purpose, he will bolster his power's uncertainties with increasing deception. Right? So if he's using it in the service of the ego, he says uncertainty will creep in. Right? Start making mistakes. He will bolster his power's uncertainties with increasing deception. Right? The more he's looking for things in the ego world, I can get this, I can get that with this ability. Right? Instead of just recognizing the ability and sitting in the awareness of unconditional love. So be clear about your purpose. All right. Paragraph 6. Any ability that anyone develops has the potentiality for good. To this, there is no exception. And the more unusual and unexpected the power, the greater its potential usefulness. Salvation has need of all abilities. For what the world would destroy, the Holy Spirit would restore. Psychic abilities have been used to call upon the devil, which merely means to strengthen the ego. Yet here is also a great channel of hope and healing in the Holy Spirit's service. Those who have developed psychic powers have simply let some of their limitations they laid upon their minds be lifted. It can be but further limitations they lay upon themselves if they utilize their increased freedom for greater imprisonment. The Holy Spirit needs these gifts, and those who offer them to Him and Him alone go with Christ's gratitude upon their hearts, and His holy sight not far behind. So when we put our abilities, whatever they are, in the service of oneness, in the service of remembering the innocence, right? You go with Christ's gratitude. Right? And His holy sight is not far behind. His holy sight to see the world as it truly is and let it disappear. To see the innocence, to see the oneness reflected in everything. When you put your abilities in the service of the Holy Spirit, of remembering who you are. All right. You go with Christ's gratitude, and His holy sight is not far behind. All right. So He's telling us, don't deny your ability. Just be clear of what your purpose is. And your purpose is to awaken from the dream, to realize who you really are. Because really the only psychic power that's important is that ability to go to the right mind and ask Jesus, help me to see correctly. The power to choose. All right. So whatever abilities you develop, and there's lots of different ways to be psychic, so to speak. But he says that's not the be-all and end-all of things. That's just something along the way. If it happens, it happens. If not, you're still going to awaken, right? It's not, it's nothing that you really need. But as you drop the barriers to the awareness of who you are, your mind is less encumbered, so to speak. So things happen. Things happen. All right. I'm just now I'm remembering once again my little niece when she's not my little niece anymore. She's like 33 or something with 2 kids and a husband. But when she was a little girl, she used to have this swing on a tree branch in the backyard. And one day she's riding around with my sisters and my mother, and there's a hurricane, and they're all trying to get home. And all of a sudden she yells out, "My tree, my tree." And when they got home, they saw that the tree had been blown over, right, into the swimming pool. It crushed the swimming pool. So she was highly connected to that tree. She loved it, you know. So that's what happens when your mind is unencumbered by the things of the ego. Right? And it just is. It's not good or bad, it just is. Right? Put it to use for the awakening, your own awakening and the awakening of all mankind. All right then, I'll be quiet now. Thank you, and I'll see you again next session.